What if I told you that the most revolutionary speech in human history wasn't delivered in a palace or a Senate chamber or even a grand temple? What if the words that would topple empires, redefine morality, and transform billions of lives were spoken on a simple hillside in ancient Palestine? Picture this. A young rabbi, barely 30 years old, sits down on a grassy slope overlooking the Sea of Galilee and begins to speak words so radical, so impossible, so beautiful that they would echo through eternity. The morning sun cast long shadows across the rolling hills of Galilee as words spread like wildfire through the surrounding villages. Jesus of Nazareth was teaching again. But this wasn't going to be another quiet gathering by the lakeside. Something was different in the air that day. Fishermen abandoned their nets, merchants closed their stalls, mothers gathered their children, and even the religious elite crept closer to listen. The crowd swelled to thousands, their sandaled feet wearing paths in the dewy grass as they climbed the hillside. But here's what nobody expected. As Jesus surveyed the sea of expectant faces before him, he didn't speak about military conquest or political revolution. He didn't promise wealth or earthly power. Instead, he opened his mouth and spoke words that must have hit the crowd like a thunderbolt. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Can you imagine the stunned silence in a world where strength meant everything, where the Romans ruled with iron fists and the religious leaders flaunted their authority? This young teacher was saying the exact opposite of everything they'd been taught. The Beatitudes continued to pour forth like water in a desert, each one more shocking than the last. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Picture the faces in that crowd: weathered fishermen, oppressed farmers, grieving widows, downtrodden tax collectors. For the first time in their lives, someone was telling them that their pain had purpose, that their suffering had meaning, that their lowly status in society was actually their qualification for God's kingdom. But Jesus wasn't finished turning their world upside down. As his voice carried across the hillside, he declared something that made the Pharisees in the crowd shift uncomfortably. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy. This wasn't just spiritual teaching, this was social dynamite. In a culture built on revenge, honor codes, and getting even, Jesus was proposing a completely different way of living. The tension in the air was palpable as Jesus continued. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. Think about this for a moment. In the Roman Empire, peacemakers were seen as weak. Warriors were celebrated, conquerors were worshipped, and violence was the language of power. Yet here was this carpenter's son from Nazareth declaring that the peacemakers would be called God's own children. Some in the crowd must have wondered if they were witnessing the birth of a revolution or the ravings of a madman. Then came the words that would seal the fate of countless martyrs throughout history. Blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when people insult you, persecute you, and falsely say all kinds of evil against you because of me. The crowd fell silent. This wasn't the message of a political messiah promising easy victory. This was a warning that following him would cost them everything: their comfort, their safety, maybe even their lives. But Jesus wasn't content to simply comfort the afflicted. He was about to afflict the comfortable. His voice grew stronger as he looked directly at his followers. You are the salt of the earth. But if the salt loses its saltiness, how can it be made salty again? In that ancient world, salt was precious beyond measure. It preserved food, it purified, it was essential for life itself. Jesus was telling these ordinary people that they weren't just spectators in God's plan. They were the key ingredient that would preserve the world from moral decay. Then came words that would inspire missionaries, reformers, and freedom fighters for millennia. You are the light of the world. A town built on a hill cannot be hidden. Neither do people light a lamp and put it under a bowl. Instead, they put it on its stand, and it gives light to everyone in the house. Imagine being a poor fisherman or a despised tax collector, hearing that you are the light of the world. Not the Caesar in Rome, not the high priest in Jerusalem, not the wealthy merchants or powerful rulers, but you. With your calloused hands and simple clothes, you are the light that will illuminate the darkness of human history. But here's where Jesus became truly dangerous to the established order. The religious leaders had spent centuries building a system of rules, regulations, and rituals that kept ordinary people dependent on their authority. They expected Jesus to either submit to their system or openly rebel against it. Instead, he did something far more threatening. He transcended it. "Do not think that I have come to abolish the law or the prophets," he declared. "I have not come to abolish them, but to fulfill them." The Pharisees must have breathed a sigh of relief until they heard what came next. Jesus' next words shattered their comfortable assumptions. "Unless your righteousness surpasses that of the Pharisees and the teachers of the law, you will certainly not enter the kingdom of heaven." The crowd must have gasped audibly. The Pharisees were the gold standard of religious observance. They fasted twice a week. They tithed down to their garden herbs. They memorized vast portions of Scripture. How could ordinary people possibly exceed their righteousness? But Jesus was about to explain, and his explanation would revolutionize the very concept of morality itself. "You have heard that it was said to the people long ago, 'You shall not murder, and anyone who murders will be subject to judgment.' But I tell you that anyone who is angry with a brother or sister will be subject to judgment." The silence was deafening. Jesus wasn't just raising the bar, he was launching it into the stratosphere. He was reaching past external actions into the hidden chambers of the human heart. Murder wasn't just about taking a life. It began with the anger that seethed in secret, the hatred that festered in darkness, the contempt that poisoned relationships before violence ever erupted. But Jesus wasn't finished dismantling their moral universe. "You have heard that it was said, 'You shall not commit adultery.' But I tell you that anyone who looks at a woman lustfully has already committed adultery with her in his heart." Now he had everyone's attention and everyone's conviction. In a few simple words, Jesus had just indicted every person on that hillside. He wasn't talking about external compliance with religious rules anymore. He was exposing the battlefield where the real war between good and evil is fought. In the landscape of human desire, in the secret places where no earthly authority could ever reach. The crowd was reeling, but Jesus pressed on with teachings that seemed to defy all logic and human nature. "But I tell you, do not resist an evil person. If anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to them the other cheek also." Can you imagine the shock? These people lived under Roman occupation. They knew what it meant to be humiliated, oppressed, treated as less than human. Their entire culture was built on honor and shame, on defending your dignity at all costs. Yet here was Jesus, proposing a response so radical it seemed like madness. Meet violence with vulnerability. Respond to hatred with love. Answer cruelty with kindness. Then came the words that would echo through history as the most impossible, beautiful, and transformative challenge ever issued to the human race. "Love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, that you may be children of your Father in heaven." The very air seemed to vibrate with the impossibility of it. Love your enemies? Pray for your persecutors? This wasn't just countercultural, it was counterhuman. Every instinct, every survival mechanism, every natural response screamed against it. Yet Jesus spoke these words with such authority, such conviction, that something deep in the human soul recognized their truth. As if reading their minds, Jesus addressed the practical questions that must have been racing through the crowd. "Do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moths and vermin destroy and where thieves break in and steal, but store up for yourselves treasures in heaven." In an age without social security, without insurance, without any safety net except what you could accumulate, Jesus was proposing a completely different approach to security. He was asking them to trust an invisible God more than visible gold, to invest in an eternal kingdom more than temporary comfort. Then Jesus painted a picture that must have brought tears to many eyes. Look at the birds of the air. They do not sow or reap or store away in barns, and yet your heavenly Father feeds them. Are you not much more valuable than they? As he spoke, perhaps a sparrow landed nearby, pecking at seeds in the grass. Here were people who worried about their next meal, who lived in constant anxiety about providing for their families, and Jesus was pointing to the simplest creatures as teachers of trust. Consider how the wild flowers grow. They do not labor or spin. Yet I tell you that not even Solomon in all his splendor was dressed like one of these. The sermon was building to a crescendo of practical wisdom that would guide human relationships for centuries to come. Do not judge, or you too will be judged. For in the same way you judge others, you will be judged. And with the measure you use, it will be measured to you. Then came an image so vivid, so absurd, that it must have brought laughter even in the midst of this profound teaching. Why? Do you look at the speck of sawdust in your brother's eye and pay no attention to the plank in your own eye? Jesus, the carpenter's son, was using imagery from his workshop to expose the comedy of human hypocrisy. People walking around with lumber protruding from their eyes, trying to perform eye surgery on others. But perhaps the most dangerous words Jesus spoke that day were these: ask, and it will be given to you. Seek, and you will find. Knock, and the door will be opened to you. Dangerous because they offered unlimited access to unlimited power. Dangerous because they suggested that the God who created the universe was as approachable as a loving father. Which of you, if your son asks for bread, will give him a stone? Or if he asks for a fish, will give him a snake? If you, then, though you are evil, know how to give good gifts to your children, how much more will your Father in heaven give good gifts to those who ask him? These weren't just words of comfort. They were an invitation to revolution through prayer. As the shadows lengthened across the hillside, Jesus delivered what would become known as the Golden Rule. In everything, do to others what you would have them do to you, for this sums up the law and the prophets. 12 words that would become the foundation of human rights, the cornerstone of justice, the measuring stick of morality across cultures and centuries. It was so simple a child could understand it, yet so profound that philosophers would spend lifetimes exploring its implications. In a single sentence, Jesus had given humanity the key to peace, the path to justice, the secret to true civilization. But Jesus ended his revolutionary manifesto with a sobering warning: enter through the narrow gate. For wide is the gate and broad is the road that leads to destruction, and many enter through it. But small is the gate and narrow the road that leads to life, and only a few find it. The crowd had been offered a choice: the easy path of following the crowd, living for themselves, pursuing temporary pleasures, or the difficult path of loving enemies, serving others, and storing treasures in heaven. As the sun began to set over the Sea of Galilee, each person faced the same question that echoes through history. Which path would they choose? That day on the hillside, a young rabbi didn't just deliver a sermon. He detonated a truth bomb that would reshape civilization itself. The Sermon on the Mount became the Magna Carta of the human soul, the Declaration of Independence for the oppressed, the Constitution of love that would outlast every earthly kingdom. For over 2,000 years, these words have toppled dictators, inspired reformers, comforted the afflicted, and challenged every generation to live up to their highest calling. The question isn't whether these teachings are practical or possible. The question is whether we have the courage to try. If this message has stirred something in your soul, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. Because the revolution Jesus started on that hillside is still changing lives today, and yours could be next. Before you go, if these biblical stories have touched your heart, please consider supporting us on Patreon. There you'll find exclusive content, early access to new videos, and so much more. The link is right in the video description. Thank you, and God bless you.